Story. Poor dad humiliated for inheriting aunt's abandoned mine before the $800 million secret was revealed. The alarm wasn't a gentle chime or a rising melody. It was a piercing digital scream that ripped Leo Vance from the depths of a dreamless sleep he desperately needed. 5 a.m. The darkness outside his small apartment window was absolute, a cold, indifferent black that matched the ache in his bones. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet hitting the chilly floorboards. For a moment he just sat there, head in his hands, his shoulders feeling as though they were carrying bags of cement. He was 40, but his body felt 60. A soft glow from the hallway nightlight illuminated a crayon drawing taped to his bedroom door. It was a picture of two stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands under a giant smiling sun. Underneath, in wobbly letters, it read, "Daddy and Maya." A faint smile touched Leo's lips. That was it. That was the reason. He moved through the quiet apartment with practiced efficiency. Every object had its place, not out of a love for tidiness, but out of a necessity born from exhaustion. There was no time to search for misplaced keys or a clean uniform. In the tiny kitchen, he swallowed a piece of dry toast while the cheap coffee maker sputtered to life. The resulting brew was bitter and thin, but it was hot and caffeinated. It was fuel. He packed a small lunch for his daughter, Maya, a peanut butter sandwich with the crust cut off, an apple, and a juice box. He left it in the fridge with a note scribbled on a napkin. "Have a great day, sunshine. I love you." His first job was at the Greasy Spoon, a diner that had seen better days decades ago. The moment he pushed through the back door, the air hit him a thick, permanent cloud of sizzling bacon, stale coffee, and fryer oil. For 6 hours, he was a machine, a blur of motion behind the line, flipping pancakes, frying eggs, plating burgers. He worked with a silent, detached focus, his mind a million miles away. He barely registered the faces of the customers or the chatter of the waitresses. He was just a pair of hands, a cog in a machine that spit out breakfast platters and lukewarm coffee. "Order up," he'd call out, his voice hoarse. "Hey, Vance, this bacon's burnt," a customer once shouted, holding up a blackened strip. His boss, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, glanced over. "Just make him another one, Leo." The customer is always right. Leo didn't argue. He didn't have the energy. He just scraped the offending bacon into the trash and laid new strips on the grill, the hot grease spitting at his already scarred hands. He was invisible. He was a utility. And in this world, that's all he could afford to be. At noon, his shift ended. There was no break, no time to sit. He wiped his hands on his apron, hung it on its hook, and walked out the back door, the smell of grease clinging to him like a second skin. He climbed into his truck, a 20-year-old Ford Ranger that rattled and groaned in protest every time he turned the key. The passenger side door was a different shade of blue, scavenged from a junkyard after a fender bender he couldn't afford to fix properly. The check engine light had been on for 3 years. He'd simply put a piece of black tape over it. Out of sight, out of mind. His second job was on the other side of town, a sprawling construction site where a new condominium complex was rising from the dirt. The transition was jarring. He left the world of contained, greasy heat for the vast, exposed world of blistering sun and swirling dust. Here, the work was pure, brute force. He spent the afternoon hauling drywall, his shoulders screaming with every sheet he lifted. The gritty dust coated his throat and settled in his lungs. The sun beat down relentlessly, and sweat streamed into his eyes, stinging them. He worked alongside other men, men who laughed and joked, sharing stories of their weekends and complaining about their wives. Leo remained on the periphery. He was friendly enough, offering a nod or a quiet hello, but he kept to himself. The other men saw him as aloof, maybe even arrogant. They didn't see the crushing exhaustion that made small talk feel like climbing a mountain. They didn't know that every ounce of his social energy was being saved for the only person who mattered. At 5 o'clock, the foreman blew the whistle. The other men dropped their tools with a clatter, eager to get home. Leo worked for another 15 minutes, stacking the remaining sheets neatly. It was unpaid time, but it meant the next day would start just a little bit easier. Every small advantage counted. The drive to Maya's after-school program was the longest part of his day. It was the final stretch of a marathon he ran every 24 hours. His body was a symphony of aches. But then, he saw her. She was sitting on the front steps of the community center, her pink backpack at her feet, reading a book. When she saw his truck pull up, her face exploded into a smile that was pure, unfiltered sunlight. She jumped up and ran to him, her small body colliding with his legs in a fierce hug. "Daddy." Leo leaned down and wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He inhaled the scent of playground sunshine and kid shampoo. In that moment, the grease, the dust, the aching muscles, and the shouted complaints all vanished. The weight on his shoulders lifted. He was no longer Leo Vance, the line cook, or Vance, the construction grunt. He was Daddy. He was home. "How was your day, sunshine?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been all day. "It was great. We learned about volcanoes. And Mrs. Davis said my drawing of the lava was very realistic," she chattered, her hand finding his as they walked back to the truck. Their apartment, which felt so bleak and empty in the morning darkness, was transformed by her presence. It was filled with her laughter as she told him about her day. For dinner, he made macaroni and cheese from a box. To the rest of the world, it was a meal of last resort. To them, sitting at their small table, it was a banquet. He listened as she explained the difference between magma and lava, her expression serious and scholarly. He saw the fire of curiosity in her eyes and felt a fierce, protective pride that was so powerful it almost hurt. Later, as he helped her with her math homework, the phone rang. The sound was an intrusion, a harsh jangle that shattered their peaceful bubble. Leo stiffened. He knew that ring. It wasn't a telemarketer, it was a family matter. He glanced at the caller ID. Sarah, his sister-in-law, Mark's wife. He almost let it go to voicemail. He wanted to preserve this perfect, simple evening, but he knew that would only lead to more calls, perhaps even an unannounced visit. With a sigh, he picked it up. "Hello, Sarah." "Leo, hi." Her voice was unnaturally bright, a carefully constructed cheerfulness that always set his teeth on edge. "I was just calling to see how you two are doing." "We're fine, Sarah. Just finishing up some homework." "Oh, lovely. Listen, the reason I'm calling is we're having a little family barbecue on Saturday. Just a small get-together. Mark is firing up the grill. You have to come." It's been too long. Leo's heart sank. A little get-together at Mark and Sarah's house was never little. It was a performance, a showcase for their new deck, their expensive wine, their well-behaved children in their brand-name clothes. It was an arena, and he was always the main event in the sad, gladiatorial sideshow of pity. "I don't know, Sarah," he started. "Work has been—" "Oh, stop," she cut in, the brightness in her voice faltering for a second to reveal the steel beneath. "You have to make time for family, Leo. It's important for Maya to see her cousins, don't you think?" It was the perfect trap, and she knew it. She had weaponized his love for his daughter. Denying Maya a chance to play with other kids would make him feel selfish. He looked over at Maya, who was now trying to balance a crayon on her nose, blissfully unaware of the negotiation happening on her behalf. Her happiness was the only thing that mattered. If an afternoon of quiet humiliation was the price for her to have a few hours of fun, he would pay it. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Okay, Sarah, we'll be there." "Wonderful," she chirped, her mission accomplished. "We'll see you around 2 on Saturday. Don't be late. Bye now." She hung up before he could reply. Leo placed the phone back on its cradle. He felt a cold dread seep into the warmth of the evening. He was going to walk into the lion's den willingly. For his daughter, he would do anything. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this Saturday would be worse than usual. He just didn't know why. Saturday arrived not with the promise of rest, but with a sense of impending trial. A knot had taken up permanent residence in Leo's stomach. He spent the morning trying to project an excitement he didn't feel, for Maya's sake. He helped her pick out her favorite dress, a simple but clean sundress with yellow flowers on it. He brushed her hair until it shone, tying it back with a matching yellow ribbon. She looked like a small ray of sunshine, and the sight both filled his heart and made it ache. He was leading her into a place where her light would be judged and measured against a dimmer, more expensive glow. "Are we going to have fun today, Daddy?" she asked, looking up at him as he tied his own worn leather shoes. "We are," he said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "You'll get to play with your cousins and eat lots of cake." The drive to Mark and Sarah's house was a journey across a divide. They left their neighborhood of chain-link fences and patchy lawns, crossing an invisible line into a world of automatic sprinklers, pristine landscaping, and houses that were more like monuments to wealth. Each street was a testament to a life Leo could only glimpse in magazines. When he finally turned onto Mark's cul-de-sac, his old truck felt like a dirty smudge on a pristine painting. He pulled up to the curb behind a gleaming black BMW that was so new it still had the paper license plate in the window. "Wow, they have a big house," Maya said, her face pressed against the glass. "Yes, they do," Leo said, turning off the groaning engine. For a long moment he just sat there, gathering his strength as if preparing for a physical blow. For Maya, he reminded himself. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Let's get this over with." Sarah opened the door before they even reached the porch, a wide, practiced smile plastered on her face. She was dressed in a white linen pantsuit that probably cost more than Leo's monthly rent. "Leo, you made it," she exclaimed, her voice a little too loud. She bent down to Maya. "And look at you, little one. What a sweet dress. Yellow is such a cheerful color." It was the way she said sweet that did it. A slight pause, a subtle inflection that managed to convey both quaint and cheap in a single syllable. It was the first cut, small and precise. Leo felt his jaw tighten. They were guided through the cool, marble-tiled entryway, past abstract art on the walls and into the backyard. The place was teeming. It wasn't a little get-together. It was a full-blown social event. A dozen adults stood in curated groups on a sprawling stone patio, sipping wine from elegant glasses. A trio of perfectly dressed children, Mark and Sarah's kids, were playing a quiet game of croquet on a lawn so green it looked artificial. The air smelled of expensive perfume and grilled sirloin. An older man with a ruddy face, Uncle Gary, clapped Leo on the shoulder. "Leo, good to see you, son. Say, did you finally get that truck of yours looked at? Sounded like it was about to give up the ghost when you pulled in." He laughed, thinking he was being affable. "It still gets me where I need to go, Gary," Leo said evenly. Maya, seeing her cousins, ran off toward the lawn with a happy squeal, momentarily forgetting him. Leo was glad. He watched her go, a pang of loneliness hitting him as he now stood alone, a solitary island in a sea of familial prosperity. He grabbed a bottle of water from a cooler, wanting something to do with his hands. That's when he saw Mark. His brother-in-law stood by a massive, gleaming stainless steel grill that looked more like the command center of a spaceship. He wore a polo shirt with a tiny embroidered horse on the chest and held a pair of tongs like a king's scepter. He was holding court, telling some loud story that had two other men roaring with laughter. Then, his eyes found Leo. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face as he excused himself and began to walk over. The knot in Leo's stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. "Leo, my man," Mark said, slapping him on the back with enough force to make him stumble. "Glad you could pry yourself away from, well, whatever it is you're doing these days. Still slinging hash?" "It's a living, Mark," Leo said, refusing to take the bait. "Is it, though?" Mark mused, taking a sip from his wine glass. He looked Leo up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on the frayed collar of Leo's shirt. "Listen, I was sorry to hear about Anna Lara. Tough break. I always liked the old bird, even if she was a little eccentric." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Tell me she left you something good. A little cash to help you get back on your feet? Maybe put a down payment on a car that was built in this century?" Leo felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. He wanted to walk away. He wanted to tell Mark exactly what he thought of him. But he could see Maya out of the corner of his eye, laughing as she tried to hit a croquet ball. He couldn't make a scene. He had to endure. He shook his head, looking down at his bottle of water. "She left me her property." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Her property? You mean that little cottage by the lake?" "No," Leo said, his voice quiet. "The old Black Creek mine?" For a second, there was silence. Mark stared at him, his brain processing the information. Then, he threw his head back and let out a laugh. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a roar. A booming, theatrical explosion of sound designed to draw attention. And it worked. The conversations on the patio faltered. Heads turned. Everyone was looking at them. "The mine?" Mark bellowed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "The abandoned mine? Oh, that is rich. That is Ilara all over. What in God's name are you going to do with a worthless hole in the ground, Leo?" He wasn't just talking to Leo anymore. He was playing to the audience. A few of the nearby relatives were smirking. others looking down at their shoes, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. Maybe you and Maya can live there, Mark continued, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. No more rent. The ultimate fixer-upper. All you've got to do is clear out the bats and the ghosts of bankrupt prospectors. Less. The shame was a physical thing now, a hot liquid spreading through Leo's chest. He felt dozens of eyes on him, a mixture of pity and contempt. He was the family joke, the charity case, and Mark had just given everyone fresh material. He looked for Maya, needing the sight of her to anchor him, but he couldn't see her. And then the situation got worse. Daddy, Daddy. Maya came running toward them, her face bright and full of excitement. She must have heard Mark talking about the mine. She skidded to a stop in front of them, oblivious to the suffocating tension. Did you tell them about our mine? She asked, her voice full of pride. She turned her big, innocent eyes to Mark. Anna Lara told me it was full of secrets. Mark's cruel smile softened into something even more condescending. He reached down and patted Maya's head, a gesture that looked possessive and patronizing. Oh, did she now? He said, his voice syrupy sweet. Well, the only secret in that mine, sweetheart, is how much debt your daddy just inherited. It's a money pit, a burden. Mark straightened up, his eyes locking with Leo's over Maya's head. His smile turned into a smirk. He let the final word hang in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Leo's heart. A burden. Just like. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication was clear, hanging in the suddenly silent air of the patio. Just like you. Something inside Leo snapped, not in a loud, explosive way, but in a quiet, decisive severance. The need for their approval, the hurt caused by their judgment, it was all cauterized in that one brutal moment. All that was left was a cold, clear duty to protect his daughter from this toxicity. He placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. His voice, when he spoke, was unnaturally calm. Come on, sweetie, he said softly. It's time for us to go home. Oh, but Daddy, I haven't had any cake yet, Maya protested, her face falling. I'll buy you a whole cake on the way home, Leo promised, his voice gentle but firm. Any kind you want. He took her hand and, without another glance at Mark or anyone else, turned and began to walk away. The journey back through the house was a walk of shame, but his head was held high. He could feel their stares on his back. He didn't care anymore. He was focused on the small, warm hand in his, and the need to get her away from this place. He buckled her into the passenger seat of the truck. She was quiet for a moment, sensing the shift in his mood. Is Uncle Mark mad at the mine? She asked. Leo started the engine, the familiar groan of the motor, a welcome sound. It was the sound of escape. No, sunshine, he said, pulling away from the curb, the reflection of the giant house shrinking in his rearview mirror. Uncle Mark just doesn't understand secrets. As he drove, Maya's disappointment about the cake quickly faded, and she began to chatter about volcanoes again. Leo listened with half an ear, his mind replaying Mark's laugh, the smirking faces, the final, unfinished sentence. The humiliation was a fresh, bleeding wound. He had walked into the arena and been mauled for their entertainment, and as he drove away from the world of wealth and judgment, he had never felt poorer or more alone. The drive home from Mark's was a study in silence. Leo kept his promise, pulling into the parking lot of a small grocery store and buying Maya an entire chocolate cake, just as he'd said he would. She sat at their kitchen table, eating a huge slice with a plastic fork, her initial delight slowly giving way to a quiet awareness of her father's mood. He didn't have a piece. He just sat opposite her, nursing a cup of coffee, the ghost of Mark's booming laugh echoing in the small, silent apartment. The humiliation hadn't stayed at the party. It had followed him home, a foul passenger that now sat at his table and mocked him. The days that followed were heavy. Leo went through the motions of his life, the diner, the construction site, picking up Maya, but a layer of gray seemed to have been painted over his world. He felt the sting of his brother-in-law's words with every aching muscle, with every cheap, unsatisfying meal. The mine, which had been an abstract concept, was now a symbol of his failure, a monument to the family's pity. He tried to push it from his mind, to bury it under the sheer weight of his daily exhaustion. But the world wouldn't let him forget. About a week after the disastrous barbecue, the mail arrived. Tucked between a credit card offer and a coupon booklet was a crisp, official-looking envelope from the county tax assessor's office. Leo's hands, calloused and smudged with grease from the diner, felt clumsy as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a property tax notice for parcel number 734B, Black Creek mining claim. The amount due was $350. Leo stared at the number, his blood running cold. $350. To Mark, it was pocket change, the cost of a single bottle of wine for one of his parties. To Leo, it was a catastrophe. It was grocery money for 3 weeks. It was the emergency fund he tried so desperately to keep tucked away. It was a sum he simply did not have. Suddenly, the mine was no longer a symbol. It was a chain. It was a real, tangible problem with a due date. He now owned the very money pit Mark had laughed about, and it was already starting to drain him. He sat down heavily at the table, the notice trembling slightly in his hand. He felt trapped, cornered by a dead relative's final, misguided act of charity. "What's that, Daddy?" Leo looked up. Maya had finished her homework and was standing beside him, looking at the official paper with curiosity. She had taken to drawing the mine in her spare time. Her latest creation was taped to the fridge, a mountain with a cave entrance. And inside, not bats or ghosts, but giant, sparkly treasures that glittered with every color of her crayon box. "It's just a bill, sunshine," he said, folding the notice and shoving it into his pocket, as if hiding it would make it disappear. "Is it for the mine?" She pressed. "When are we going to see it?" "You promised we could look for the secrets." Her persistence was a gentle, insistent pressure. For her, the mine was a place of magic and adventure, a fairy tale passed down from a beloved great-aunt. How could he tell her it was just a pile of worthless rock and debt? How could he extinguish the bright, hopeful light in her eyes? "Soon," he hedged. "It's a long drive. We need to plan it properly." But her questions had planted a seed. The tax bill had to be dealt with. He couldn't just ignore it. He remembered the lawyer who had handled Aunt Alara's will had given him a small cardboard box of her personal effects, things the rest of the family hadn't wanted. It was sitting in the back of his closet, forgotten. Maybe, he thought with a desperate lack of optimism, there was a deed inside, or some other document he could take to the county office to relinquish ownership. He could just give it back. Tell them to keep their cursed mountain. That evening, after Maya was asleep, he pulled the box out. It was light, filled with the small, accumulated detritus of a long life. The air filled with the faint, sweet smell of lavender and old paper as he lifted the lid. He sorted through the contents under the dim light of a table lamp. There was a silver thimble, a handful of black and white photos of people he didn't recognize, a dried flower pressed between the pages of a small poetry book. It was a box of ghosts, of memories that weren't his. He felt a pang of sadness for his aunt, a woman most of the family had dismissed as eccentric, a woman whose entire life had been condensed into this small, forgotten box. He didn't find a deed. There were no official documents at all. His last, desperate hope began to fade. He was about to close the lid when his fingers brushed against something thick and firm at the bottom. He pushed aside a bundle of old postcards tied with a ribbon and saw it. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with its contents. On the front, written in a familiar, elegant script that slanted slightly to the right, was his name. Leo. Just his name. No address, no stamp. It had been meant to be in this box. It had been meant for him. His heart began to beat a little faster. He ran his thumb over the wax seal on the back, an imprint of a small bird. He'd seen that seal on the birthday card she used to send him as a child. With a deep breath, he carefully broke it and pulled out the folded pages within. The letter began not with a formal salutation, but as if they were in the middle of a conversation. "My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, then the old rock pile is finally yours, and I am off on my next great adventure. I can already hear Mark's laughter from here. Let him laugh. He and the others, they see the world in dollars and cents. They measure a man's worth by the shine on his shoes. They will call you a fool for taking on Black Creek. Let them." Leo paused, a lump forming in his throat. It was as if she were in the room with him, her voice a warm, knowing whisper. She had seen it all coming. "They see dirt. But you are always different, Leo. Even as a boy, you have a kinder heart. You see potential where others only see waste. That's why the mine had to be yours. It needs someone who can see beyond the surface. Now, listen to your old aunt very carefully. The family's fortune was not made on that mountain, but their living was. They were looking for the wrong thing. Decades of digging for coal, and they missed the entire point. It's like searching for firewood in a library. Don't look for coal, my boy. The real treasure of Black Creek isn't what we burn for warmth. It's what the future will be built with. I've enclosed some of the old survey maps. They won't make sense to most, but they might help later. What you need to do is go to the old office shack. Under the floorboard to the left of the desk, you'll find a small box. Inside are what I always called the blue vein stones. They don't look like much. The others would have thrown them away. But they are the secret. You won't know what to do with them, but someone else will. Do you remember your old geology professor from college? The one with the wild hair and the passionate lectures you told me about? Dr. Eris Thorne. Find him. Show him the stones. A man who loves the earth will know how to read its secrets. Trust your heart, Leo. And trust me, the mountain has been waiting. All my love, Aunt Ilara. Leo read the letter a second time, then a third. His hands were shaking. Blue vein stones? Doctor. Thorne? It all sounded like something out of a child's adventure novel. His rational mind screamed that it was nonsense, the hopeful fantasy of an old woman. He was a tired, broke man holding a piece of paper, not a treasure map. But then, a memory, faint and dusty, sparked in a forgotten corner of his mind. A university lecture hall. A man with wild gray hair, Dr. Thorne, pacing in front of the chalkboard, his voice booming with passion as he spoke of rare earth minerals, of strange geological formations, of the hidden building blocks of the modern world. It was from another lifetime, a life of intellectual curiosity he'd had to abandon when his father got sick and he dropped out of college to work. He looked from the letter to Maya's drawing on the fridge, a mountain filled with secrets, sparkly treasures. It was a long shot. It was a fool's errand. A flicker of hope against a mountain of doubt. He should just throw the letter away, figure out how to pay the tax bill, and get on with his miserable life. But as he sat there in the quiet of his apartment, the weight of the world on his shoulders, that single, tiny flicker felt brighter than the sun. For the first time since he had stood in Mark's perfect backyard, it was something. It was a secret, and it was his. Leo didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table until the first gray hints of dawn seeped through the window, the letter from his Aunt Ilara lying open before him. Her words had become a mantra, a challenge to the weary cynicism that had become his constant companion. They seed dirt, but you were always different. Was he? Or was he just a desperate man clinging to a fairy tale because the reality was too bleak to bear? Every rational part of his brain told him it was a wild goose chase. He was a line cook, not an adventurer. He had bills to pay and a daughter to raise. He had no time or money for fanciful quests based on the cryptic letter of an eccentric old woman. He should focus on what was real, finding a way to pay the $350 tax bill before the county imposed a lien on a property he didn't even want. But then he'd look at the letter again. Trust me, there was a conviction in her words that resonated deeper than logic. It was the same conviction he heard in Maya's voice when she talked about the mine's secrets. It was a faith he hadn't felt in himself for a very long time. By the time the sun was fully up, he had made a decision. It wasn't a choice born of logic, but of something more elemental. It was a choice to honor his aunt's final wish. It was a choice to show his daughter that he believed in secrets too. He couldn't let the story of the mine end with Mark's mocking laughter. He had to see it for himself. He had to know. He called Sal at the diner and told him he had a family emergency that he wouldn't be in. He then called the construction foreman and did the same, absorbing the grumbled annoyance on the other end of the line. It was a reckless move. Losing 2 days' pay was a significant blow, one that would make paying the tax bill even harder. But the pull of the mountain was now stronger than the fear of his boss's wrath. He woke Maya gently. "Sunshine," he whispered. "How would you like to go on a road trip today? We're going to see the mine." Maya's eyes flew open, sleep instantly forgotten. "Really? The secret mine?" "The one and only," Leo said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. The journey was a pilgrimage into the past. For the first hour they were on familiar highways, surrounded by the rush of commuters and transport trucks. But then Leo turned off the main road, following a state route that grew narrower and more winding with every mile. The landscape began to change dramatically. The flat, urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, then to the dense, green forests of the foothills. The air that came through the open windows of the truck lost its city grit, replaced by the clean, sharp scent of pine and damp earth. They passed through small, forgotten towns with peeling paint on their storefronts and names like Hopewell and Last Chance. They were relics of a different era, places the modern world had bypassed. With each passing mile, Leo felt like he was not only driving away from his life, but driving back in time. Finally, he saw the sign, its green paint faded and chipped by decades of sun and snow. Black Creek Pop, 26. The town itself was little more than a ghost. A dozen dilapidated houses, a boarded-up general store, and a gas station with rusted-out pumps were all that remained. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt road. It was a place steeped in failure, a community that had died when its reason for being the mine had given out. A profound sense of desolation hung in the air, and Leo's earlier flicker of hope began to dim. What treasure could possibly be found in a place so thoroughly abandoned by fortune? He followed a rough dirt track that led out of the ghost town and up into the mountains. The truck bucked and groaned, its worn suspension complaining loudly as it navigated the ruts and rocks. The forest closed in around them, the tall pines blocking out the sun. And then, around a final, sharp bend, they were there. It was exactly as worthless as Mark had described. The entrance to the mine was a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain, crudely boarded over with thick, weathered planks of wood. A sign, tilted and rusted, hung from a single nail. In faded red letters, it read, "Danger Keep Out, Black Creek Mining Co." The ground was littered with rusted debris, old rails, a broken ore cart, the skeletal remains of machinery surrendering to the relentless march of nature. To the left of the entrance stood the office, the shack his aunt had mentioned. It was a sorry sight. The small structure sagged to one side, its roof half collapsed. The windows were shattered, and the door hung crookedly on a single hinge. It looked as though a strong gust of wind could level it. "Is that it, Daddy?" Maya asked, her voice small. The fairy tale image in her head was colliding with the grim reality before her. "This is it, sweetie," Leo said, trying to keep the disappointment out of his own voice. He felt a fool. He had wasted a day's pay and driven all this way for this? For a pile of rotting wood and rusted metal? Mark's laughter echoed in his ears once more. Still, he had come this far. He had to see it through. "You stay here in the truck, okay? Lock the doors. I'm just going to look in that little house for a minute." Maya nodded, her earlier excitement now replaced with a quiet apprehension. Leo got out of the truck, the silence of the place pressing in on him. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was an empty quiet, heavy with the ghosts of failed ambition. He pushed the office door, and it scraped open with a protest of shrieking, rusted hinges. The inside was even more derelict than the outside. A thick blanket of dust and grime covered everything. Leaves and dirt had blown in through the broken windows, and a fine tracery of cobwebs hung from every corner. In the center of the room was a single, sturdy-looking metal desk, its surface scarred and pitted. A calendar on the wall was turned to October, 1978. He walked over to the desk, his boots crunching on fallen plaster and broken glass. He saw the spot his aunt had described in the letter, a section of floorboards to the left of the desk. They looked no different from the rest, but when he knelt and pressed on one, he felt a slight give. His heart hammered against his ribs. Using the tire iron he'd brought from the truck, he carefully pried at the edge of the board. It resisted, held fast by a half-century of damp and neglect, then came loose with a splintering groan. He pulled it up, revealing a dark, square cavity beneath. And inside, just as she had promised, was a small, heavy box made of dark wood. It wasn't locked. He lifted the lid, his hands trembling slightly. The interior was lined with faded blue velvet. Nestled within were about a dozen rocks. They were dark, almost black, and unremarkable in size and shape. They looked like chunks of coal or worthless slate. He almost dismissed them as a prank, a final, eccentric joke from his aunt. But then he tilted the box, letting the faint light from the doorway catch them. He saw them. Faint, thread-like veins of a strange, deep blue color ran through the dark stone. They didn't sparkle or glitter. They were subtle, almost hidden, like secrets whispered in the dark. The blue-veined stones, he didn't know what they were. They could be nothing, a geological anomaly of no value. But they were real. His aunt's letter hadn't been a complete fantasy. He carefully lifted one of the stones from the box. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, cool and solid in his palm. He stood up, clutching the stone, and looked around the decaying office. He saw the old, leather-bound ledgers and rolled-up charts his aunt had also mentioned, lying on a dusty shelf. He gathered them up, tucking them under his arm. He placed the stone back in its velvet nest, closed the box, and put the loose floorboard back in place. As he stepped out of the shack and back into the mountain air, the world felt different. The silence was no longer empty, it was watchful. The mountain no longer felt like a monument to failure, but a keeper of secrets. He was still a broke, tired man holding a box of strange rocks and some dusty old maps. He might still be a fool, but for the first time he felt like a fool with a purpose. He had found the next clue. Now he just had to find Dr. Eris Thorne. The drive back down the mountain was profoundly different from the drive up. The heavy sense of dread had been replaced by a thrumming, nervous energy that felt entirely new to Leo. He kept glancing at the old wooden box resting on the passenger seat beside him, a tangible link to his aunt's mysterious legacy. Maya, sensing the shift in his demeanor, had recovered her own spirits. She chattered on about the spooky ghost town and the secret treasure box, her imagination already weaving a grand narrative around their strange day trip. Leo let her talk, her innocent enthusiasm a welcome soundtrack to the storm of questions in his own mind. The blue-veined stones, the dusty maps, and the name that was now his only beacon, Dr. Eris Thorne. Back in the city, the familiar weight of his life settled back onto his shoulders. But it felt different now. The tax notice was still a problem. The lost wages were still a reality, but they were no longer the sum total of his existence. There was now a question mark, a wild card, sitting in the back of his closet. The next day, instead of resting between his shifts, Leo took a bus to the downtown public library. The place was an oasis of quiet in his noisy world. He sat at a public computer terminal, the plastic keys feeling foreign under his calloused fingertips. He typed Dr. Eris Thorne, geology into the search bar and hit enter. The results came back instantly. Dr. Thorne wasn't just real, he was well documented. There were links to published papers with impenetrable titles, mentions in university newsletters, and finally, a faculty page at Northwood State University, the very college Leo had briefly attended a lifetime ago. According to the page, he was now Professor Emeritus, semi-retired but still maintaining an office and research privileges. There was a photo, a man with a wild mane of white hair, a mischievous twinkle in his eye, and a face mapped with the lines of a life spent outdoors. It was him. The man from the lecture hall. Leo stared at the phone number listed on the page. His hand hovered over his own cheap cell phone, a wave of intense self-consciousness washing over him. What was he going to say? "Hello, Dr. Thorne. You don't know me, but I was in your Intro to Geology class 2 decades ago. My dead aunt told me in a letter to bring you some rocks I found under a floorboard in a haunted shack." He sounded like a lunatic. The professor was a respected academic, a man of science and reason. He would be laughed off the phone, his call dismissed as a prank or the ramblings of a crank. Leo nearly closed the browser window. He could feel the familiar pull of defeat, the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Mark telling him he was a fool chasing a ghost. It would be so much easier to just go back to his life, to accept his lot. Then, he thought of Maya. He pictured her face, alight with the belief in secrets. He thought of his aunt's handwriting, the firm, confident loops of her signature. Trust me. He couldn't turn back now, not when he was this close. He took a deep breath, walked outside to the library courtyard where he could get a signal, and dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. It rang 3 times, each ring echoing the frantic beat of his own heart. "Thorne," a gravelly voice answered, abrupt and to the point. Leo's throat went dry. Hello, is this Dr. Eris Thorne?" "It is," the voice said, a hint of impatience in it. "To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Leo Vance," he began, his voice sounding thin and unsteady to his own ears. "You don't know me, sir, but I was a student of yours. A long time ago. I have a geological question. It's about a property my aunt left me. The old Black Creek mine." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Leo held his breath, expecting to hear a click as the professor hung up. "Black Creek?" Dr. Thorne repeated, his tone shifting from impatience to curiosity. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. Always was a geological anomaly, that region." Supposed to be a rich coal seam, but it busted faster than any operation in the state. What's your question, Mr. Vance? The genuine interest in the professor's voice was the encouragement Leo needed. He explained, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, the story of his inheritance, his aunt's letter, and the strange blue vein stones he had found. He left out the part about Mark's ridicule and his own desperation. He tried to present it as a simple, factual puzzle. He could hear the professor humming thoughtfully on the other end. Blue vein stones, Dr. Thorne mused. That doesn't correspond to any standard coal accompanying strata I'm aware of. It's intriguing. I'm on campus Tuesdays and Thursdays. Can you get here? Yes, sir, Leo said, his heart leaping. I can be there tomorrow. Good. Find the Earth Sciences building. My office is on the 4th floor. And Mr. Vance? Bring the stones, and any of those old maps you mentioned. The next day, Leo took another unpaid day off. He felt a reckless disregard for the consequences. He dressed in his best clothes, a pair of clean jeans and a collared shirt that wasn't frayed. He carefully wrapped each blue vein stone in paper towels and placed them back in the wooden box along with the rolled-up survey charts. Walking onto the Northwood State University campus was like stepping into a parallel version of his own life. He saw students lounging on the grass, books splayed open, laughing and talking with the easy confidence of youth. This was the path he had been on before life had intervened. He had been a good student, genuinely fascinated by the story of the Earth. But his father's illness, followed by his death, had forced Leo onto a different road, one paved with manual labor and mounting bills. Being here now, with a mystery in a box, felt like a strange and bittersweet homecoming. He found the Earth Sciences building, a modern structure of glass and steel. Dr. Thorne's office was at the end of a long, quiet corridor. The door was ajar, and a nameplate read, Dr. Aris Thorne, Professor Emeritus. Leo knocked softly. Come in, the gravelly voice called out. Leo pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was a chaotic masterpiece. Every surface was covered. Books were stacked in precarious towers on the floor. Geological maps were tacked to the walls, covered in handwritten notes. Fossils of every shape and size sat on shelves next to gleaming crystal formations. The place smelled of old books, chalk dust, and strong coffee. And behind a massive oak desk, submerged in the glorious clutter, was Dr. Aris Thorne. His white hair was even wilder in person, a defiant halo around his head. He looked up, his bright, intelligent eyes sizing Leo up from behind a pair of spectacles. Mr. Vance, I presume, he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. You found me. Have a seat, son, have a seat. Don't mind the mess. It's the byproduct of a curious mind. Leo sat in the chair opposite the desk, feeling utterly out of place. He placed the wooden box on the one clear space on the desk. Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Thorne. Nonsense. The words geological anomaly and Black Creek are more than enough to get my attention, the professor said, leaning forward eagerly. So, let's see the evidence. Let's see your aunt's mysterious stones. With slightly trembling hands, Leo opened the box. He unwrapped the paper towels from one of the heavier stones and placed it on the desk between them. Dr. Thorne fell silent. He leaned over the stone, his expression shifting from one of genial curiosity to one of intense, professional focus. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. He tilted it back and forth under the light of his desk lamp, his eyes tracing the faint blue veins that ran through the dark rock. He grunted, a low sound of surprise. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a jeweler's loupe, a small magnifying glass that he fixed to his eye. He spent a long minute examining the stone's surface, his brow furrowed in concentration. Extraordinary, he muttered, more to himself than to Leo. The density is all wrong for coal shale. And this veining, it's not a common sulfide like azurite or bornite. The crystallization is different. He put the stone down and looked at Leo, his eyes sharp and bright. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice now devoid of its earlier folksiness. It was the voice of a scientist on the verge of a discovery. Tell me everything again, from the beginning, and don't leave a single detail out. Leo found himself recounting the entire story, But this time, it felt different. In the cluttered, academic sanctuary of Dr. Thorne's office, the tale shed its skin of foolish fantasy and became a set of data points, a puzzle waiting to be solved. He told the professor about his aunt, her quiet wisdom, and her disdain for the family's obsession with appearances. He laid out the old, brittle survey maps on the desk, their cryptic lines and faded numbers suddenly looking less like nonsense and more like pieces of a larger, hidden picture. Dr. Thorne listened with an unwavering, intense focus. He didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed every word, his gaze shifting from Leo's face to the dark stone on his desk, to the old maps, as if triangulating the information in his mind. When Leo finished, a heavy silence settled over the office, broken only by the hum of an old computer fan. The professor picked up the stone again, his touch a mixture of reverence and clinical analysis. "Your aunt was a remarkable woman, Mr. Vance," he said quietly. "To dismiss a known coal seam and intuit that the real value lay in something overlooked, that is the very essence of scientific discovery. She had the eye." He stood up and walked over to a metal cabinet, from which he produced a small, diamond-tipped scribe. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the stone. Leo nodded. And Dr. Thorne made a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the surface of the rock. He examined the resulting dust under his loupe. "Not graphite," he murmured. "Definitely not. The luster is metallic but submetallic. And the streak is interesting." The chapter of Leo's life that had been defined by grease, dust, and exhaustion was now filled with words like luster, strata, and crystallization. He felt like a spectator at a game for which he didn't know the rules, but he was completely mesmerized. The professor's excitement was infectious, a palpable energy that made the air in the small office crackle. "This is fascinating, but visual identification is, at best, an educated guess," Dr. Thorne announced, his eyes gleaming. "We need to know its elemental composition. We need to ask it what it's made of." He strode over to a bench against the far wall, where a piece of equipment that looked like a high-tech microwave sat. It was gray, boxy, and covered in dials and a small digital screen. "My trusty old X-ray spectrometer," he said, patting its side affectionately. "She's not the newest model, but she's honest. She'll tell us the truth." The process was slow and methodical. Dr. Thorne, with the precision of a surgeon, used a tiny hammer and chisel to break off a minuscule piece of the blue-veined stone. He ground the fragment into a fine powder with a mortar and pestle, then carefully pressed it into a small pellet. The entire time, he kept up a running commentary, explaining each step to Leo not as one would to a child, but as one would to a colleague. "X-ray fluorescence works on a simple principle," he explained, his hands moving with practiced ease. "We bombard the sample with high-energy X-rays. This excites the atoms within the sample, causing them to knock their electrons into a higher orbital shell. But that state is unstable. The electrons immediately fall back to their original state, and in doing so, they release a secondary, fluorescent X-ray." He looked up at Leo, his eyes bright. "And here's the magic, Mr. Vance. Every element, carbon, iron, gold, you name it, emits that secondary X-ray at a unique, characteristic energy level. It's a fingerprint. The machine reads those fingerprints and tells us exactly what we're looking at and in what concentration." He placed the small pellet into a sample tray and slid it into the spectrometer. He closed the thick, lead-lined door, typed a series of commands into a connected keyboard, and hit a large green button. The machine began to hum, a low, steady drone that filled the office. A progress bar appeared on the small screen. The wait was agonizing. It was only 5 minutes, but it stretched into an eternity. Leo sat perfectly still, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. His entire life, his past of quiet desperation, his future, Maya's future, seemed to be held in suspension, dependent on the silent, digital judgment of this humming gray box. He watched Dr. Thorne, who was staring at the screen with the unblinking intensity of a hawk watching its prey. The humming stopped. A series of graphs and charts flooded the screen. Dr. Thorne went utterly still. He leaned so close to the monitor that his nose almost touched the glass. His glasses slid down. He didn't seem to notice. He let out a low whistle that was barely audible. "My word," he whispered. "What is it?" Leo asked, his voice a dry croak. "Is it anything?" Dr. Thorne didn't answer immediately. He clicked the mouse, bringing up a table of raw data, his eyes scanning the columns of numbers. He mumbled a string of elements: columbite, manganocolumbite, microlite. Finally, he pushed his chair back from the desk with a screech and turned to face Leo. The mischievous twinkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "what your aunt called blue vein stones, what your family dismissed as waste rock from a failed coal mine, is one of the richest, purest veins of tantalite I have ever seen, or even read about." The name meant nothing to Leo. What? Tantalite, Dr. Thorne repeated, enunciating every syllable. "It's the primary ore of the element tantalum." He saw the blank look on Leo's face and leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. "Leo, may I call you Leo? Tantalum is one of the most vital technology metals on the planet. It's a miracle element. It has an extremely high melting point and is incredibly resistant to corrosion. But its most important property is its ability to store and release electrical charge. Every capacitor in every smartphone, every laptop, every tablet, every GPS unit, every digital camera." He gestured around the room as if encompassing the entire modern world. "They all rely on tantalum to function." He stood up and began to pace the small space in front of his desk. "And it is incredibly rare. The world's supply comes from just a handful of places, many of them in conflict zones. It's one of the primary conflict minerals. Ethically sourcing it is a nightmare. A deposit of this size and purity, located right here. Leo, this isn't just valuable. It's strategically important." Leo's head was spinning. He was trying to connect the dots between the heavy, dark stone in his hand and the sleek smartphone in his pocket. It didn't seem possible. Is it worth anything?" he finally managed to ask. The question sounding small and foolish in the face of the professor's grand pronouncements. Dr. Thorne stopped pacing and let out a short, sharp laugh. "Is it worth anything?" He came back to the desk and pulled the old survey maps towards him. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or perhaps..." His voice trailed off as he unrolled the maps, smoothing the brittle paper. He studied the lines and notations, his brow furrowed once more. He cross-referenced them with a large geological survey map of the state that was tacked to his wall. He pulled out a calculator and began punching in numbers, muttering to himself about ore density, recovery rates, and current market prices per kilogram. Leo watched, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The world outside the office, the university, the city, his entire life had ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the professor's muttering and the soft clicks of the calculator keys. After several long minutes, Dr. Thorne stopped. He stared at the final number on the calculator's display. He took off his glasses, polished them on his shirt, and put them back on, as if to make sure he was seeing correctly. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He didn't say a word. He simply turned the calculator around for Leo to see. Leo looked down. His brain struggled to process the number. There were too many zeros. It wasn't a number you saw in real life. It was an astronomical figure, a number associated with governments and corporations, not with men who worked 2 jobs to make rent. 834,500. Based on a conservative estimate of the deposit size indicated on your aunt's maps and the purity of this sample, Dr. Thorne said, his voice quiet and steady, a preliminary valuation, before any official core drilling, would put the raw mineral value somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 million. Leo stared at the number, but he didn't truly see it. He saw Maya's future, safe and secure. He saw an end to the bone-deep weariness that had been his companion for years. He saw an escape from the casual cruelty of his brother-in-law. He saw freedom. The room began to tilt. The edges of his vision went fuzzy. The sound of Dr. Thorne's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Mr. Vance? Leo?" He gripped the arms of the chair to steady himself. $800 million. His aunt hadn't just left him a secret. She had left him a new world. He didn't know if he was terrified or elated. He only knew with a certainty that shook him to his very core that nothing would ever be the same again. The drive home from the university was a surreal blur. Leo remembered Dr. Thorne giving him a glass of water, The cool liquid, a shocking anchor in the spinning chaos of his mind. He remembered the professor's firm handshake and the promise to help him navigate the incredible situation he now found himself in. "You'll need a good lawyer, Leo," Thorne had said, his voice laced with fatherly concern. "Not just any lawyer, a specialist. The sharks will start circling the moment the blood is in the water." The professor, bound by the ethics of his position and the sheer magnitude of the find, explained that he had to report it to the university's board and the state's geological survey. It was a matter of public and scientific record. The discovery wasn't just Leo's anymore. It belonged to the world of geology. Leo had simply nodded, his mind still struggling to comprehend the string of zeros on the calculator screen. He drove on autopilot, the wooden box with its billion-dollar secret resting on the passenger seat. The world outside his truck windows looked the same, but it was fundamentally different. The tired faces of people waiting at bus stops, the crumbling asphalt of the roads, the faded billboards, it was all part of a life that was no longer his. He was a ghost driving through his own past. He picked Maya up from her after-school program, and the simple, profound love he felt as she ran to hug him was the only thing that felt real. How could he explain to this beautiful, innocent child that the world had just cracked open and offered them a new reality? How could he protect her from the deluge he knew was coming? That night he barely slept. He sat in his small living room, the lights off, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across the walls. $800 million. The number was a living entity in the room with him. It was a promise, but it was also a threat. It was a key, but it was also a cage. The downpour began 2 days later. It started not with a bang, but with a short article on the university's website. The headline was dry and academic. "Northwood State Professor Confirms Significant Tantalum Deposit in Dormant Regional Mine." The article was sparse on details, omitting Leo's name and the exact location, but it mentioned the potential for a major, ethically sourced supply of a critical technology metal. A local news blogger, a former student of Thorne's, saw the post. Recognizing the scientific significance, he wrote a more sensational piece. "Tech Gold Rush? $1 billion mineral find in our backyard." That article was picked up by a statewide newswire. By noon, it had been syndicated nationally. The first call came while Leo was at the diner, in the middle of the lunch rush. It was his day to work, a vestige of a life that was already disintegrating. His phone buzzed in his pocket with an unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. During a lull, he stepped into the back alley, the smell of grease clinging to him, and answered. "Is this Leo Vance?" A slick, aggressive voice asked. "Who is this?" Leo responded, wary. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm with a venture capital firm that specializes in mineral extraction. We heard a rumor you might be the lucky man sitting on the Black Creek claim. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer, Mr. Vance. Cash. Today." Leo was so stunned he couldn't speak. How did they get his name? His number? "Mr. Vance, are you there? We're talking 8 figures, just for the exploratory rights." "I'm not interested," Leo managed to say, and hung up, his hand shaking. He went back inside, but the buzzing in his pocket didn't stop. It was a relentless vibration against his leg. Financial advisors, real estate agents, mining corporation scouts. The sharks had found him. The true deluge began when he went to pick up Maya. A news van was parked across the street from the community center. A reporter with a microphone and a cameraman in tow intercepted him as he got out of his truck. Mr. Vance, is it true? Are you the billion-dollar prospector?" Leo froze, like a deer in headlights. He shielded his face and pushed past them, his heart hammering. No comment. He grabbed Maya's hand and practically ran back to the truck, bundling her inside as the reporter shouted questions after them. When they got back to their apartment building, it was even worse. 2 more news vans were double parked out front. A small crowd of reporters and curious neighbors had gathered. The moment they saw his truck, they swarmed. Flashes from cameras went off, momentarily blinding him. "Leo, how does it feel to be a billionaire? What are you going to do with the money? Is it true you were working as a cook just this morning?" He put his arm around Maya, who was frightened and confused by the shouting mob, and pushed his way through the building's front door. He fumbled with his keys, slammed the apartment door behind them, and slid the deadbolt into place. They were prisoners in their own home. Maya started to cry. "Daddy, why are those people yelling at us?" He knelt and held her close. "They're just excited about a story, Sunshine. It's nothing to be afraid of. We're safe in here." But he didn't feel safe. He felt exposed, hunted. His quiet, anonymous life had been violently ripped away. And then the phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and his blood ran cold. Mark. He let it ring, the sound an unbearable intrusion. It stopped, then immediately started again. With a sense of grim inevitability, he answered it, putting it on speakerphone so he could continue comforting Maya. "Leo, buddy, I heard." Mark's voice was a manic roar, so loud that Leo had to pull the phone away from his ear. It was a bizarre cocktail of feigned excitement and frantic energy. Incredible. "I can't believe it. I can believe it. I always knew there was something special about that land. I always told you." The hypocrisy was so potent, so breathtakingly audacious, that Leo felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. "You told me it was a worthless hole in the ground, Mark," he said, his voice flat. "What? No. I was joking. Just giving you a ribbing, toughening you up." Mark laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "That's what family does. We test each other." "Listen, Leo, this is fantastic news. A real blessing for the whole family." There it was, the family. "So," Mark continued, his voice dropping to a more conspiratorial tone, "I'm sure you're being flooded with offers. Don't listen to any of them. They're vultures. You need to keep this in the family. I've been having some temporary cash flow issues with my business. You know how it is. If you could just front me a small investment, say 20, maybe 30 million, we could set up our own company to manage the mine. Keep it all in the family. It's the smart thing to do. The right thing to do." Leo looked at Maya, her tear-streaked face pressed against his chest. He looked around the small, cramped apartment that had been his refuge. And he listened to the voice of the man who had humiliated him in front of that very family, now begging for a piece of the prize he had so openly mocked. "I have to go, Mark," Leo said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Wait, Leo, don't hang up. We need to talk strategy." Leo ended the call. The phone immediately rang again. A different unknown number. And again, the downpour had become a flood. His life was no longer his own. Just then, his phone buzzed with a text message. He expected it to be another reporter or another Mark, but the name on the screen was Eris Thorne. The message was simple. "Leo, it started, hasn't it? Don't answer your phone. Don't speak to anyone. I have a friend, a lawyer. The best. Her name is Eleanor Vance. No relation, just a happy coincidence. She's expecting this chaos. Go to her. Now. I'm sending the address. Disappear for a while." An address followed the message. It was for an office in the city's most exclusive downtown district. Disappear. The word was a lifeline. He looked at Maya, who had cried herself into a fragile, hiccuping quiet. He looked at the door, behind which the world was shouting his name. He had to get her out. He had to escape the downpour. Aunt Alara had left him a fortune, but it was Dr. Thorne who was offering him a lifeboat. Disappearing when the entire world is looking for you is not a simple task. The lobby of Leo's apartment building was a media choke point, a gauntlet he couldn't possibly run with a terrified 8-year-old in tow. His mind raced, the instincts of a father overriding the paralysis of a man in shock. He needed a plan. He went to the kitchen and looked out the small window above the sink. It faced the back alley, a grimy, graffiti-strewn corridor filled with overflowing dumpsters. A fire escape, rusted but solid, zigzagged down the brick wall from the floor above, its lowest landing just a few feet from his window. It wasn't elegant, but it was a way out. "Okay, Sunshine," he said to Maya, his voice taking on a calm he didn't feel. "We're going to play a new game. It's called Super Spies. We have to sneak out of the building without anyone seeing us. Can you do that?" Maya, her eyes wide, nodded solemnly. The transformation of their escape into a game chased away her fear, replacing it with a focused determination. Leo packed a single backpack with a change of clothes for both of them, the wooden box of stones, the old maps, and Maya's favorite stuffed rabbit. Every other possession in the apartment, the worn furniture, the old dishes, the physical remnants of his former life, no longer mattered. He carefully pried open the kitchen window. The alley smelled of stale garbage and rain. He climbed out first, testing the fire escape with his weight. It groaned but held. Then he reached back in for Maya, lifting her easily and setting her down beside him. "Okay, super spy," he whispered. "Hold my hand, and don't look down." They moved down the iron stairs, their footsteps quiet against the rusted metal. Below them, they could hear the faint murmur of the reporters out front, a distant pack of wolves. They slipped into the alley unnoticed and walked 2 blocks in the opposite direction before Leo hailed a taxi, his heart pounding until they were safely inside and pulling away from the curb. He gave the driver the address from Dr. Thorne's text. The taxi carried them from his world into another. They left the neighborhood of cracked pavement and aging apartment blocks, traveling downtown into the city's financial heart. Here, the buildings were sleek towers of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. The people on the sidewalks wore tailored suits and walked with a sense of purpose and importance. It was the world Mark had always tried to emulate. For the first time, Leo didn't feel like an intruder here. He felt like a refugee seeking asylum. The address belonged to one of the most prestigious towers. The lobby was a cavernous space of polished marble and quiet, expensive art. A serene receptionist looked up from a minimalist white desk. "We're here to see Eleanor Vance," Leo said, feeling a fresh wave of self-consciousness. He was aware of his worn jeans, of Maya clinging to his hand, of the simple backpack slung over his shoulder. The receptionist's smile was polite and impenetrable. "Of course, Dr. Thorne let us know to expect you. Please, go right up. 40th floor." The elevator ride was silent and swift, a smooth ascent that felt symbolic. When the doors opened, they stepped not into a hallway, but directly into the reception area of a law firm. The sign on the wall, etched in brushed steel, read, "Vance and Sterling, Strategic Law." A woman stood waiting for them. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, elegantly styled silver hair, and an aura of such profound competence that it was almost palpable. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. She was, Leo knew instantly, the architect. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice calm and assured. She extended a hand. "I'm Eleanor Vance. Eris told me you'd be on your way." Her handshake was firm. She then knelt slightly to be on eye level with Maya. "And you must be Maya. It's a pleasure to meet you. We have a room with some very good hot chocolate and a lot of coloring books, if you'd like." Maya, won over by the woman's warm, direct gaze, nodded shyly. An assistant appeared as if from nowhere and gently guided Maya toward a side room. "She'll be perfectly fine," Eleanor said, leading Leo toward a corner office with a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. "Now, let's talk about how we're going to fix this." The office was immaculate, organized with the precision that was the polar opposite of Dr. Thorne's glorious chaos. There were no stacks of books or messy papers, only a sleek desk, 2 leather chairs, and the city skyline. "Eris gave me the broad strokes," Eleanor began as soon as they sat down. "But I need to hear it from you, everything. Start with your brother-in-law's barbecue." For the second time in as many days, Leo told his story. But this time was different from his confession to Dr. Thorne. With Eleanor, he included the emotional details, the humiliation from Mark, the weight of his financial struggles, the terror of the media swarm, the desperate phone call demanding money. He laid the entire, messy truth of his life on her desk. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable but her attention absolute. She didn't take notes. She simply absorbed the information, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Good. The first rule in a situation like this is to control the narrative. Right now, you have no control. The world sees you as a fairy tale character, the billion-dollar prospector, a lottery winner, and everyone from your family to the most predatory investment firm thinks they're entitled to a piece of your winnings. We're going to change that narrative, starting today." Her efficiency was stunning. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls. The first was to a man named David, the head of a private security firm. "David, it's Eleanor. I have a new client. He and his 8-year-old daughter, they need a complete extraction and relocation. Secure residence, untraceable, full media blackout. I want them gone in an hour." The second call was to a woman named Anya, a public relations specialist. "Anya, situation red. I'm sending you a file. We have a client who has just become the most visible man in the country. I need a press release drafted immediately. The tone is not lottery winner. The tone is serious custodian of a significant geological discovery. Emphasize partnership with the university, responsible development, and a new foundation being established in the name of LR Vance. We are defining him before they can. The third call was to her firm's chief financial officer. Move $5 million from the firm's contingency fund into a new client trust for Leo Vance. He's going to have expenses. She hung up and looked at Leo, who was staring at her, dumbfounded. In less than 10 minutes, she had erected a fortress around him. You are no longer a private citizen, Leo, she said, her voice kind but firm. You are now the head of a corporation, whether you've founded it yet or not. Your inheritance isn't a pile of money, it's an asset. A massive, complex, and politically sensitive asset. My job is to be the wall between you and the world, so you can make clear-headed decisions. She explained her plan. He and Maya would be moved to a secure, private residence outside the city, a furnished home on a large, gated property where no one could find them. A private tutor would be arranged for Maya. His old life, the apartment, the truck, the 2 jobs was over. Effective immediately. Her firm would handle everything. They would field the offers, vet the potential partners, and engage with the mining corporations. They would also handle Mark. Family is the trickiest part, she said, a flicker of something almost like sympathy in her eyes. Greed makes people do ugly, desperate things. Your brother-in-law will not give up easily. We will issue a formal cease and desist. Any further contact will be logged and handled through this office. Leo felt a dizzying sense of relief, so profound it almost made him lightheaded. The immense crushing weight of the past 48 hours was being lifted from his shoulders by this calm, capable woman. He wasn't alone in the storm anymore. He had found the architect. Why? Leo asked, the question surprising even himself. Why are you doing all this, Doctor? Thorne is your friend, but this is. His gesture took in the view, the office, the sheer scale of her intervention. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a faint smile touching her lips. Eris and I have been friends for 30 years. He is a man of science, a romantic who believes in the beauty of the earth. I am a pragmatist who believes in the protective power of the law. We make a good team. But more than that, Mr. Vance, my firm specializes in complex situations. We've handled hostile takeovers, international arbitration, the estates of rock stars. Your story, she said, a genuine spark of interest in her eyes, is one of the most wonderfully complex situations I have ever seen. A good man, a beloved daughter, a secret inheritance, family betrayal, and a discovery that could reshape a global industry. It's a case that reminds me why I became a lawyer in the first place. An hour later, Leo and Maya were in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows, driven by a discreet security guard. They left the city behind, traveling to a new, unknown life. As he looked back at the skyline, Leo realized he hadn't just found a lawyer. He'd found a general, and the war for his future had just begun. The secure residence was less a house and more a small, self-contained world. It was a modern but understated home nestled on 20 acres of rolling hills and oak trees, a good hour's drive from the city. A long gravel driveway led to a gate that was manned 24/7 by a polite but imposing security guard who was part of David's team. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Leo could breathe. The constant, vibrating anxiety that had been his companion since the news broke finally began to recede, replaced by a profound and bewildering stillness. Life became a strange paradox of luxury and isolation. The house was beautiful, filled with tasteful furniture, a fully stocked kitchen, and bedrooms with soft beds and clean linens. Outside, Maya discovered a swimming pool and a sprawling lawn perfect for cartwheels. To her, it was the ultimate vacation. She was enrolled with an online tutoring service and had daily video lessons with a cheerful, patient teacher named Miss Albright, who made learning feel like a game. For Maya, the transition was an adventure. For Leo, it was a period of intense and often uncomfortable adjustment. After 2 decades of a life dictated by the relentless rhythm of alarm clocks, time cards, and exhaustion, the sudden abundance of empty time was disorienting. He would wake up at 5 a.m. out of sheer habit, the phantom feeling of greasy diner air in his nostrils, only to find himself in a silent, sun-drenched bedroom with nothing to do and nowhere to be. He wandered the spacious house like a ghost, his worn-out work boots looking comically out of place on the polished hardwood floors. He was a man built for labor, his body conditioned for physical strain. Now, his hands, which were used to gripping wrenches and hauling drywall, had nothing to hold. He spent hours walking the property's perimeter, the quiet crunch of his footsteps on the gravel path, the only sound. He was living in a gilded cage, and while he was grateful for its safety, he was acutely aware of the bars. His only link to the outside world, the world that was furiously debating his fate, was Eleanor Vance. She was his general, and she ran her campaign with ruthless efficiency. The press release her team had drafted was a masterpiece of narrative control. It was published in major newspapers and online outlets, effectively silencing the rags to riches narrative. The story was no longer about a lucky cook who won the lottery. It was about the posthumous legacy of a forward-thinking woman named Elara Vance and her chosen heir, who was working closely with esteemed scientists to ensure the responsible stewardship of a significant national resource. The announcement of the Elara Vance Foundation for Young Scientists was a stroke of genius, immediately framing Leo not as a recipient of wealth, but as a future philanthropist. The effects were immediate. The rabid, sensationalist coverage died down, replaced by more sober business analysis and geological reports. The vultures who had been circling were forced to change their tactics. The flood of aggressive, direct calls to Leo stopped. Everything was now funneled through the sleek, impenetrable wall of Vance and Sterling. Eleanor called Leo every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Her calls were his new job. "Good morning, Leo," she would begin, her voice always crisp and clear. "Here is the situation today." She would then provide him with a concise summary of the overnight developments. A major Canadian mining conglomerate had made a formal offer of $200 million for a 40% stake and full operational control. A German technology firm had proposed a joint venture focused on ethical extraction and supply chain transparency. A slick private equity group from New York had offered to buy the entire claim outright for $500 million in cash, a tempting but predatory offer designed to take advantage of his inexperience. "They're betting you'll take the fast money," Eleanor explained, her voice devoid of judgment. "They assume you're unsophisticated, that you'll be scared of the complexity and just want to cash out. It's a lowball offer considering the strategic value, but it's more money than you've ever dreamed of. It's designed to make you panic." Leo listened, learning a new language of leveraged buyouts, equity shares, and mineral rights. He asked questions, and Eleanor answered them patiently, explaining the complex legal and financial machinery that was now grinding away on his behalf. He was no longer just a father. He was a student in the most intense business course in the world. During this time, the first formal communication from his brother-in-law arrived. It wasn't a phone call, but a thick package delivered to Eleanor's office. It contained a rambling, 12-page letter from Mark, oscillating wildly between fawning praise for Leo's hidden genius and thinly veiled threats about the importance of keeping things in the family. It was accompanied by a poorly drafted proposal for a Vance family mining company, with Mark listed as president and CEO, and Leo as a silent majority shareholder. "It's amateurish, but it's also a declaration of intent," Eleanor said coolly over the phone. "He's making his first move on the chessboard. We will respond with a polite but firm rejection from this office, stating that all business proposals are being evaluated by a team of independent experts." "Will that be enough?" Leo asked, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. "For now," Eleanor replied. "He will escalate. People like your brother-in-law believe that wealth and opportunity are zero-sum games. For you to win, he must feel like he is losing. Be prepared for that." The strangest part of Leo's new life was the absence of want. For years, his every waking thought had been colored by a low-grade panic about money. The rent, a car repair, a dental bill for Maya each was a potential catastrophe. Now, he had a corporate credit card, provided by Eleanor's firm against his future earnings, that he was instructed to use for all their needs. The first time he used it, at a local grocery store, his hand trembled. He bought everything they needed without once looking at the prices: fresh fruit, good cuts of meat, organic milk, a ridiculously expensive brand of ice cream that Maya had pointed at. The total came to over $200, an amount that would have previously sent him into a spiral of financial anxiety. He swiped the card. The transaction was approved in a silent, anticlimactic instant. He walked out of the store feeling not joy, but a profound sense of dislocation. The survival instinct that had driven him for 2 decades was suddenly obsolete. He didn't know who he was without the struggle. One afternoon, watching Maya do a cartwheel on the endless lawn, he felt a pang of a new kind of fear. He was providing her with safety and security beyond his wildest dreams. But what was he teaching her? His own identity had been forged in hardship and work. He knew the value of a dollar because he had earned each one through sweat and exhaustion. Maya would grow up in a world where money was an abstract concept, where the swipe of a card could solve any problem. He worried that the fortune meant to give her the world would end up robbing her of understanding it. That evening, he called Eleanor. "I need to do something," he said, foregoing any pleasantries. "I can't just sit here." There was a pause on the other end. "I was wondering when you'd get here," Eleanor said, a hint of a smile in her voice. "Good." The passivity was beginning to worry me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to understand," Leo said. "I want to understand the mine. Not just the money, but the place itself. The geology. The process. The impact. I don't want to be a silent partner in my own life, Eleanor. Aunt Elara didn't leave this to me so I could hide in a nice house and let other people make all the decisions." He could hear Eleanor's genuine approval. "Excellent," she said. "I'll arrange it. We'll start with Dr. Thorne. He's been itching to get a proper core drilling team up on that mountain. It's time for you to go back to Black Creek. But this time, you'll go as its owner." Returning to Black Creek was like stepping onto a different planet. The last time Leo had been here, he was a desperate man in a rattling truck, chasing the ghost of a fairy tale. This time, he arrived in a comfortable black SUV, part of a small convoy that included Dr. Eris Thorne and a team of professional geologists. The dirt track leading to the mine had been graded and widened. The rusted danger sign was gone, replaced by a new, professional one. Black Creek Project. Vance Strategic Minerals. LLC, his company. The name chosen by Eleanor still felt foreign on his tongue. The dilapidated office shack was still there, but it was now cordoned off, preserved as a historical marker. A new modular command center had been set up nearby, humming with the quiet efficiency of modern technology. Leo stepped out of the SUV and breathed in the crisp mountain air. It was the same air, but he was a different man. He was no longer a victim of his circumstances. He was becoming the architect of his future. He spent the next few weeks on that mountain, not as an executive, but as an apprentice. He wore steel-toed boots and a hard hat, standing alongside Dr. Thorne and the drilling team. He learned to read core samples, to understand the complex language of strata and grade purity. He listened as environmental engineers discussed reclamation plans and methods for minimizing the mine's impact on the surrounding ecosystem. He wasn't just the owner. He was a student, absorbing every facet of the incredible legacy his aunt had left him. The work was demanding, and for the first time since his discovery, he felt grounded. His hands had a purpose again. During this period, the final confrontation with Mark happened not with a bang, but a whimper. After his formal proposal was rejected, Mark had grown increasingly erratic, leaving rambling, angry voicemails with Eleanor's office. Finally, he had made the colossal mistake of showing up unannounced at the law firm, demanding to see Leo. He was politely but firmly escorted out by security. The next day, a courier delivered a box to Leo's secure residence. Inside was every photo of Leo and his late wife that Mark and Sarah had, along with a single, venomous note. "We don't want any reminders of your side of the family." Leo looked at the photos, the images of a happier, simpler time. He felt a pang of sadness, not for the loss of Mark, but for the man his brother-in-law had become, a man so consumed by envy that he had to salt the earth of his own past. He packed the photos away carefully. That chapter of his life was officially over. The climax of his education came when Eleanor flew in by helicopter, along with the CEOs of the two finalist corporations vying for partnership. They didn't meet in a boardroom. At Leo's insistence, they met at the mine's command center. Dressed in billion-dollar suits, they looked out of place against the rugged backdrop of the mountain. Leo, dressed in simple work clothes, led the meeting. He spoke not of profit margins or stock prices, but of his aunt's vision. He talked about ethical extraction, environmental responsibility, and profit sharing with the local community to revitalize the ghost town of Black Creek. He wasn't the man who had been humiliated at a barbecue. He was the quiet, confident custodian of the mountain. He ultimately chose the German technology firm. Their proposal was not the most lucrative in the short term, but it was the one that focused on sustainable, long-term development. It was a partnership, not a buyout. It was a decision Aunt Alara would have made. A few months later, Leo stood on the porch of a new home. It wasn't a sterile mansion, but a comfortable, modern farmhouse he had designed himself, built on a piece of land just a few miles from the revitalized town of Black Creek. The Alara Vance Foundation was already funding scholarships for local kids and had endowed a new research wing at Northwood State University, overseen by a delighted Dr. Thorne. Maya, now 9, came running up the porch steps, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, the first houses in town are finished. Can we go see?" "Of course, Sunshine," he said, swinging her up into his arms. As they got into their new, reliable truck, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Eleanor Vance. She got out, looking as impeccably professional as ever, but her smile was genuine. In her hand was a single, framed document. "I thought you should have the original," she said, handing it to him. It was the property tax notice, the $350 bill that had once felt like a death sentence. Across it, in red ink, was a single word: paid. "A reminder," Eleanor said softly, "of how far you've come." Leo looked at the notice, then at his daughter, then at the mountain that loomed in the distance, no longer a symbol of debt, but of promise. He realized then what his true inheritance was. It wasn't the tantalum, it wasn't the $800 million. That was just a catalyst, the key that had unlocked the cage. His real inheritance was the lesson his aunt had tried to teach him, that true worth is never determined by the judgment of others. It's found in your own heart, in your integrity, and in the quiet strength it takes to see potential where everyone else only sees a worthless hole in the ground. He was finally free, not because he was rich, but because he finally knew his own value. And that was a secret worth more than any treasure the mountain could ever yield. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Upstory. We believe that the most powerful stories are about the transformations of the human spirit. What did you think of Leo's final decision? Was it the right one? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. And if you love stories of redemption, struggle, and unexpected triumph, please subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new narrative. We are grateful for every single one of you. Thank you for watching.